They say the void has no temperature, but that's a lie told by people who've never served deep in a warship's belly. The void has a temperature. It seeps through triple-layered hull plating, through insulation blessed by tech priests who've never felt cold in their augmetic bodies, through the very air itself until it settles in your bones like an infection that never quite kills you, but never lets you forget it's there. I've felt that cold for 11 years, 3 months, and 17 days. I know because I've counted every single one of them, scratched marks into the underside of my bunk, where the overseers can't see, where the servitors don't think to look. My name is Ratings, Technician 3rd Class Mera Valdis, and I maintain the plasma conduits in Section 47 of the Imperial Navy cruiser Unrelenting Doctrine. This is what that actually means. The ship is 9 kilometers long from prow to stern, 3 kilometers at its widest point, and houses approximately 47,000 souls if you count the ones that are still technically alive. I know this because I've seen the crew manifest, glimpsed it once when a junior officer left his data slate unattended in a corridor, and I had 3 seconds before a servitor rounded the corner. 47,000 people living in a metal coffin that travels through a dimension where physics is a polite suggestion and reality is whatever the navigators say it is. On any given day, most of those people I'll never meet. Most of them don't know I exist. We're organized by section, by function, by the specific task the ship requires us to perform until we die or break down enough that it's more efficient to render us into protein paste. For the reclamation vats, I work in the engineering decks, 7 levels below what the officers call habitable space, in corridors that run parallel to the plasma conduits that feed the ship's void shields. The conduits are 15 meters in diameter, contained within housings of blessed steel that are supposed to prevent radiation leakage, but which actually just slow it down to rates that won't kill you immediately. The tech priests say the Emperor protects. What actually protects is the lead-lined body glove I wear for my 12-hour shifts, the rad scrubbers embedded in the ceiling that wheeze and grind as they filter particles that would turn your cells into slush, and the weekly injections of anti-radiation compounds that taste like copper and make your teeth ache for hours afterward. I've been doing this for 11 years. The standard life expectancy for a ratings technician in my section is 15 years from date of assignment. I'm watching the calendar very carefully now. The day begins at 0400 hours ship time, though day is a courtesy term since there's no sun here, no external reference point except the endless dark that presses against the observation ports like something living. The wake-up klaxon is a sound designed by someone who understood that sleep is a luxury, and that luxury breeds weakness. It's pitched at exactly the frequency that makes your skull vibrate, that sends your heart rate spiking before your conscious mind has fully processed that you're awake. 340 ratings sleep in barracks 17, Gamma, stacked in bunks welded to the walls in rows of 6, each bunk exactly 1.8 meters long and 0.6 meters wide. I'm 1.7 meters tall and mass approximately 54 kilograms after 11 years of protein paste and vitamin supplements that prevent scurvy, but not malnutrition. I fit, barely. We dress in silence because talking during prep cycle is a waste of energy that could be better spent on work. The body gloves are stored in lockers that smell of rubber and sweat and something else, something chemical that might be the residue of whatever they use to decontaminate them between shifts. Mine has my identification number stenciled across the back. RT34701 VLD. Ratings Technician 3rd Class, Section 47, Crew Roster 1 Valdis. I stopped thinking of myself as Mera sometime in the 3rd year. It's easier that way. Names are for people with lives complex enough to require individual identification. What I am is a function. What I do is maintain conduits. The name is just administrative necessity. The walk from barracks to workstation takes 11 minutes at regulation pace. Through corridors painted in the dull grey that's supposed to reduce eye strain, but actually just makes everything look like it's already decaying. The lighting comes from lumen, strips that flicker occasionally. Their machine, spirits irritable from decades of service without proper maintenance. We pass other ratings moving in different directions, headed to different sections, performing different functions. No one makes eye contact. Eye contact implies relationship, implies human connection. And connection is dangerous aboard a warship, where any section can be sealed and vented if the ship takes damage. Better to think of everyone else as mobile components, necessary, but ultimately replaceable. Better not to know their names, or where they come from, or whether they have families on distant worlds who still remember them. Section 47 is located in the aft engineering quarter, accessible through a pressure door that requires both a physical key and a biometric scan. The door is 3 meters thick, designed to seal automatically if it detects catastrophic pressure loss or radiation levels above acceptable thresholds. Acceptable, in this context, means levels that would kill you in hours rather than minutes. The door's machine, Spirit, makes a grinding sound when it cycles open, a noise I've heard twice daily for 11 years, and which I'll probably hear in whatever dreams I have on the other side of death. Beyond it is the conduit access corridor, a space 15 meters wide and 300 meters long, running parallel to the main plasma feeds. The air here tastes like ozone and heated metal, like the exhalations of a machine that's been running at the edge of tolerance for so long it's forgotten what normal operation feels like. My workstation is Bay 12, approximately halfway down the corridor. The bay contains the diagnostic equipment necessary to monitor conduit integrity, a cogitator terminal with a screen that flickers green and amber, a set of manual pressure gauges that haven't been calibrated in years, but which regulations require we check anyway, and a tool locker containing the specialized implements needed to perform field repairs. Arc, welders blessed by the Mechanicus, sealant compounds in containers that bear purity seals, and warnings in 6 languages, radiation detectors that click with varying intensity depending on how close you stand to the conduit housing. My detector starts clicking the moment I enter the bay. It never stops. You learn to tune it out the same way you learn to tune out the ship's vibrations, the constant low frequency hum of the plasma drives, the occasional shudder when the void shields deflect something that would have otherwise torn through the hull. The work itself is technically simple, but practically complex. The conduits carry superheated plasma at temperatures that would vaporize human tissue instantly. The housings contain that plasma through a combination of magnetic fields and physical barriers. Over time, the barriers degrade. Micro fractures develop in the steel. Sealants break down under constant radiation exposure. The magnetic field generators drift out of alignment. My job is to identify these failures before they cascade into catastrophic breaches, and to repair them using tools and materials that are themselves degrading, that are never quite sufficient for the task, but which are all the ship can spare, because there are 46,999 other crew members who also need resources. I spend the first hour of each shift reviewing diagnostic data from the previous cycle. The cogitator displays this information in columns of numbers and symbols that took me 3 years to fully interpret, that still sometimes shift in ways that suggest the machine spirit is uncertain about what it's reporting. Pressure readings, temperature variations, magnetic field coherence percentages, radiation levels cross-referenced against baseline tolerances that were established decades ago by tech priests who may or may not have understood what those numbers actually meant. I document everything in a logbook, physical paper, because cogitators can be corrupted or wiped, but paper endures. The logbook is 17 centimeters thick, filled with 11 years of my handwriting, gradually deteriorating as chronic radiation exposure damages the fine motor control in my fingers. Today's readings show an anomaly in conduit 7. Pressure fluctuation outside normal parameters. Not severe enough to trigger automatic warnings, but present. Persistent. The kind of deviation that might mean nothing or might mean a micro fracture is propagating through the housing, expanding with each pressure cycle until it reaches critical threshold and releases several thousand liters of plasma directly into the corridor. I mark it for physical inspection, gather my tools, and begin the walk to conduit 7's access point. The conduits themselves are beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Through the inspection ports, reinforced crystal 3 centimeters thick, you can see the plasma flowing. Watch it move through the magnetic channels like liquid light, like captured stars being forced through veins too small to properly contain them. The light is blue, white, painfully bright, and it casts everything in the access corridor in stark shadows that seem to move independently of the objects creating them. Staring at it for too long leaves after images burned into your retinas, purple ghosts that persist for hours. I've learned to look obliquely, to use peripheral vision, to trust my instruments more than my eyes. Conduit 7's access port is located 3 meters above the deck, requiring a ladder that folds out from the wall when you activate its release mechanism. The ladder is standard Imperial Navy issue, constructed of steel alloy that's developed a fine patina of rust despite the dry air, despite the regular maintenance schedules that exist in regulation documents, but not in actual practice. I climb with my toolkit strapped to my back, feeling each rung through the thin soles of my work boots, feeling the subtle vibration that runs through every physical structure in this section, the ship's heartbeat translated into tremors that never quite stop. The inspection reveals what I already suspected, a stress fracture in the housing, approximately 4 centimeters long, hairline, thin but definitely present. The metal around it has discolored slightly, a darkness that suggests thermal damage from plasma leakage. Not severe, not yet, but growing. I document it with a picked recorder that's supposed to timestamp and geolocate every image, but which actually just saves blurry photographs to a memory chip that I'll download later because the wireless upload hasn't worked properly in 6 years. Then I begin the repair process. First step, isolate the affected section. This requires rerouting plasma flow through secondary channels, a process controlled by valve mechanisms that are themselves ancient, that require both electronic authorization and physical manipulation. I input the commands on a keypad whose numbers have been worn smooth by decades of use, then manually crank the valve wheel 3 full rotations clockwise. The plasma flow shifts with a sound like distant thunder, like something massive moving just beyond hearing range. The pressure in conduit 7 drops. The light visible through the inspection port dims slightly. Good. Second step, apply sealant. The compound comes in tubes that must be kept refrigerated because it degrades at ambient temperature, becomes useless within hours of exposure to the corridor's heat. I work quickly, extruding the gray paste directly into the fracture, watching it flow into the micro spaces between metal surfaces, filling the gaps where superheated plasma would otherwise escape. The sealant contains blessed oils. I can smell them, a scent like old incense mixed with synthetic pollen. polymers, like the Mechanicus's attempt to merge faith and chemistry into something that actually functions. I recite the litany of repair as I work, but not because I believe it helps, but because regulations require it, because some tech priest millennia ago decided that prayer was as important as proper technique. Third step, reinforce. This requires placing a metal patch over the sealed fracture, welding it into place with an arc welder that spits sparks in colors that shouldn't exist, that leave spots dancing in my vision despite the protective goggles. The weld must be perfect. Too cold, and it won't bond properly. Too hot, and it damages the underlying housing, creates new weak points. I've done this thousands of times. My hands know the correct angle, the proper distance, the exact moment to release the trigger and let the weld cool. The patch glows orange, then red, then fades to black. I test it with a pressure gauge. Solid. Acceptable. Fourth step, restore flow. The valve wheel cranks counter clockwise, the command's input in reverse sequence. The plasma returns, pressure building, temperature rising. I watch the gauges, watch for any sign that the repair is failing, that I've missed something, that in 5 seconds or 5 minutes this section of corridor will be flooded with hot matter. The numbers stabilize. Green indicators on the cogitator, the fracture holds. I breathe out, realize I've been holding my breath for the last 90 seconds, feel the peculiar light, headedness that comes from extended oxygen deprivation in air that's already thin. This process repeats. Different conduits, same problems. Micro fractures, salient degradation. Magnetic field generators that drift out of alignment and must be manually corrected using calibration tools that themselves require calibration. I repair 17 separate issues during my 12-hour shift. 17 potential catastrophic failures prevented. 17 ways the ship could have died that it didn't because I was here. Because I performed my function. Because the Imperium's vast machine continues grinding forward on the backs of people like me, who maintain the systems that no one else thinks about. The other ratings in Section 40. 7 are people I know without knowing. Technician Gorvis works Bay 8, a man in his 16th year who moves with the careful slowness of someone whose joints no longer articulate properly, whose hands shake from nerve damage that anti-radiation compounds can slow but not prevent. We exchange nods during shift changes. Never speak. What would we say? Technician Cell works Bay 19, younger than me by perhaps 5 years, already showing the signs. Hair thinning, skin developing the grayish cast that indicates cellular breakdown, the persistent cough that means her lungs are beginning to fail. She'll be dead within 3 years. We all know it. She knows it. No one mentions it. Overseer Cragg manages Section 47 from a control station located at the corridor's midpoint, a space barely large enough for one person and the cogitator banks that display the section's overall status. Cragg is in his 23rd year, which makes him a statistical impossibility, a man who should have died a decade ago, but who somehow continues functioning through what might be faith, or might be simple refusal to acknowledge that his body is falling apart. He speaks rarely, issues work assignments through Vox, caster announcements, conducts inspections with the thoroughness of someone who understands that any oversight could mean all of us die screaming. I respect him because he's competent. I fear him because he has the authority to report inefficiency. And inefficiency aboard an Imperial Navy vessel is cause for reassignment to penal duties or simply execution if the ship's command structure decides you're more valuable as protein paste. The shift ends at 1600 hours. The return to barracks is slower than the morning walk because exhaustion makes your legs heavy, makes the slight incline of certain corridors feel like climbing mountains. We queue at the decontamination station, strip out of our body gloves, submit to scanning by servitors that check radiation exposure levels and mark anyone above threshold for medical intervention. 3 ratings are pulled from the queue today. They'll report to the Medica deck, receive treatments that might extend their service life by weeks or months, return to duty until the next time the accumulated damage becomes too severe to ignore. One of them is crying silently, tears running down her face as she walks toward the Medica corridor. She's young, new, still operating under the delusion that any of this is temporary. That service aboard the ship is something you eventually leave, rather than something that consumes you. Evening meal is served in Mess Hall 17, Gamma, a space that accommodates 300 ratings at a time through a rotation system that ensures no one spends more time eating than is strictly necessary. The food is protein paste dispensed from machines that also provide vitamin supplements and caloric content calibrated to exactly the amount needed to sustain a working human body at minimal acceptable function. It tastes like nothing, like the concept of nutrition divorced from pleasure or sustenance, reduced to pure chemistry. I eat mechanically, not because I'm hungry. I stopped feeling actual hunger years ago, but because not eating means decreased performance, means eventual reassignment. You develop a relationship with eating that's purely transactional. The body requires fuel. You provide fuel. The fact that consuming it produces no joy is irrelevant. After meal comes personal time, a 2-hour period between 1800 and 2000 hours during which ratings are permitted to engage in approved recreational activities. These include physical exercise in the designated training space, educational study via cogitator terminals that provide access to approved imperial texts, participation in prayer services conducted by the ship's chaplains, or simply rest. Most people rest. Lie in their bunks staring at the underside of the bunk above them, thinking whatever thoughts you think when your life has been reduced to a cycle of work and sleep broken only by the knowledge that eventually the radiation or the accidents or simple cellular breakdown will kill you. I spend personal time writing, not officially, not in any recorded format, but on scraps of paper I've accumulated over the years, using a stylus I repaired from broken components. I write about what the work actually involves, about the specific technical details that no one outside Section 47 understands or cares about. I write because the act of recording creates the illusion that any of this matters beyond the immediate functional necessity, that somewhere someone might read these words and understand what we do down here in the ship's depths, what it costs, what it means to be a component in a machine so vast that your individual existence is statistically negligible. These pages are hidden in the space beneath my bunk's mattress, wrapped in waterproof fabric I salvaged from a damaged body glove. If they're discovered, I'll be punished for unauthorized document creation. I write anyway, because the alternative is accepting that when I die, I'll leave nothing behind except a notation in a crew manifest and 17 centimeters of logbook, entries documenting conduit repairs. The ship's population is stratified with a precision that would be impressive if it weren't so absolute. At the top are the command officers, the captain whose name I've never heard spoken aloud, whose presence is communicated through orders that filter down through layers of hierarchy until they reach people like Overseer Cragg, who translate them into work assignments. Below them are the department heads, the senior officers who manage major systems, weapons, navigation, engineering, logistics. Below them are junior officers, specialists, with ratings of higher classification than my own. And at the bottom are people like me, the ones who maintain the fundamental systems that allow everything above us to function. I've seen officers exactly 3 times in 11 years. Once during initial assignment processing, when a lieutenant whose uniform was so clean it looked ceremonial explained work expectations to a group of 200 newly assigned ratings in a voice that suggested he'd given this speech hundreds of times and would give it hundreds more. Once during a hull breach in Section 30, that required emergency response from multiple departments, when I glimpsed a senior officer coordinating repair efforts from behind a pressure barrier, speaking into a Vox unit with the calm authority of someone who knew people were dying but couldn't afford to acknowledge it. And once when I was conducting repairs near a junction that connected to officer territory, when a junior lieutenant passed through, noticed me working, and looked directly through me, as if I were part of the ship's structure rather than a person performing a task. That's what you are, down here. You're infrastructure. Living infrastructure, temporarily, but fundamentally no different from the conduits and the cogitators and the lumen strips. You perform your function until you fail, and then you're replaced with another component that will also eventually fail. The ship doesn't care. The Imperium doesn't care. The Emperor, if he notices you at all, notices you only as a single spark in a galaxy of trillions, a light so brief and insignificant that its extinction creates no darkness. The ship has been in transit for 87 days. I know this because Vox announcements periodically inform the crew of mission status, though they never explain what the mission actually is or where we're going. We entered the warp on day 1 of this voyage, emerging from whatever port we'd been stationed at. I never learned which one, never had reason to, and translating into the immaterium where human understanding of space and time becomes optional. Travel through the warp feels different from real space navigation. The ship's vibrations change quality, develop harmonics that seem wrong, that make your inner ear report motion that isn't happening. Some ratings claim they can feel the navigator working, can sense when we're approaching warp storms or navigating particularly turbulent regions. I've never felt anything except the persistent cold and the low-frequency hum that suggests the Jella fields are operating, that we're still protected from the things that swim in the immaterium's depths. We've lost 4 crew members during this transit, not from my section. Section 47's casualties have been 0 this voyage, which is exceptional and probably means we're overdue for an incident. But from other areas, 1 from a fall in the cargo holds a ratings loader who missed their footing and dropped 7 meters onto metal decking. 2 from equipment failures in the weapons bays, crushed when an ammunition hoist's machine spirit malfunctioned and released several tons of mass shell rounds prematurely. 1 from unknown causes, found dead in their bunk during morning wake, cycle with no visible injury and no explanation. The body was removed. A replacement rating was assigned to their position within hours. The ship continued functioning because the ship always continues functioning. Individual components fail, but the system persists. On day 43, something happened to the Jella fields. I know this not from official announcements, but from the way the ship's vibrations changed, from the brief period of approximately 90 seconds when the temperature in Section 47 dropped so precipitously that our breath became visible, when the lumen strips flickered and dimmed and something seemed to move in the shadows between them. The cogitators went haywire, displaying characters that weren't Imperial Gothic, symbols that hurt to look at. Then whatever had happened unhappened. Temperature normalized, lights stabilized. The cogitators rebooted and resumed their normal functions. Overseer Cragg ordered us to continue working. We continued working. No one discussed it. You don't discuss these things because discussing them means acknowledging them, and acknowledgement means confronting the reality that we travel through a dimension that wants to kill us, that the only thing preventing our immediate annihilation is technology we barely understand, maintained by people like me, who are themselves slowly dying from the effort. On day 61, I witnessed something through one of the observation ports that dot the corridors at irregular intervals. These ports are small, maybe 30 centimeters in diameter, made of crystal that's supposed to be proof against both physical damage and whatever radiation the warp produces. They're positioned at random heights, suggesting they were added during construction without coherent planning, or that the ship's layout has been modified so many times that their original positions no longer make sense. Most ratings avoid looking through them. The warp is not meant for human observation, but I looked because I was conducting repairs near one, and curiosity is a reflex I haven't fully suppressed. What I saw: nothing, then everything, then something that was neither, but which my brain attempted to interpret as both simultaneously. Colors that don't exist in real space, that seem to be composed of emotions rather than wavelengths. Shapes that twisted through dimensions I couldn't properly perceive, that left my eyes watering and my stomach cramping with nausea and movement. Vast, purposeful movement suggesting presences that dwarfed the ship, that could have swallowed us entirely and not noticed. I looked away after perhaps 3 seconds, spent the next hour vomiting what little was in my stomach into a waste disposal unit, while my hands shook and my vision swam with after-images that resembled screaming faces. If you looked at them at the wrong angle, Cragg found me afterward, looked at me with eyes that suggested he knew exactly what I'd done, said, "Next time you feel curious, ratings, technician, remember that curiosity is a luxury reserved for people who matter enough to waste time on questions. You don't. Do your work. Maintain your conduits. Die having served the Emperor faithfully. That's the only narrative available to you." He walked away. I returned to Bay 12 and resumed repairs with hands that barely trembled at all. The dream started on day 68. Not during sleep. I've mostly stopped sleeping in any meaningful sense, instead entering a fugue state that resembles unconsciousness but which never quite achieves actual rest. These are waking dreams, intrusions of imagery and sensation that occur while I'm working, while I'm walking the corridors, while I'm eating in the mess hall. They last seconds, maybe minutes. Time becomes unreliable when they happen. In the dreams, I see the ship as it actually is. Not the corridors and the bulkheads and the conduits, but the underlying structure. I see 9 kilometers of assembled matter held together by gravity and electromagnetic forces, and the collective faith of 47,000 people who believe it will continue existing. I see how fragile it all is, how dependent on continuous maintenance, on the millions of small repairs performed daily by people like me. I see what happens when those repairs stop, when the micro fractures propagate unchecked, when the plasma breaches and the atmosphere vents, and the cold that I've lived with for 11 years becomes absolute, becomes the colder void that kills in seconds. In the dreams, I understand that the ship is dying, has always been dying, that every vessel in the Imperial Navy is dying from the moment of its construction, that entropy and degradation are constants that can be slowed, but never stopped, that we're all serving aboard corpses that haven't quite finished the process of becoming dead. The tech priests don't acknowledge this. The officers don't acknowledge this, but down here in Section 47, surrounded by systems that are held together with sealant and prayer and desperate improvisation, the truth is obvious. On day 73, Technician Gorvus collapsed during his shift. I was conducting repairs in Bay 9 when I heard the sound. Something heavy hitting metal decking, then silence. I found him lying near Bay 8's access ladder, his body contorted in a position that suggested either stroke or massive cardiac failure. His eyes were open, moving, tracking me as I approached. His mouth worked but produced no sound. I activated the emergency Vox channel, reported medical casualty, waited. The response team arrived 18 minutes later. 2 ratings in medical whites, carrying a stretcher and diagnostic equipment. They scanned Gorvus with instruments I didn't recognize, consulted quietly, then loaded him onto the stretcher with professional efficiency. One of them noticed me watching and said, 16 years in the conduit section. Impressive, he should be dead already. They carried him away. I haven't seen him since. Bay 8's work assignments were redistributed among the remaining technicians within an hour. I now maintain both Bay 12 and Bay 8, 4 separate conduits instead of 12. The workload is unsustainable. I complete it anyway because the alternative is discipline or reassignment or simply being declared inefficient and rendered into protein paste. On day 87, the ship's Vox system broadcast an announcement from the captain himself, a voice I'd never heard before. Smooth and commanding and utterly devoid of doubt, we would be translating back to real space within 36 hours. Our destination was classified. Our mission was critical to the Emperor's will. All personnel were to prepare for potential combat operations. Crew efficiency was acceptable but could be improved. The Emperor protects the faithful. End transmission. 36 hours. I counted them not because I was eager for whatever comes next, but because counting is something you do when you need to anchor yourself to linear time, when the dreams have started making the boundary between now and later feel porous. I performed my duties, repaired 14 separate conduit issues across bays 12 and 8, ate my protein paste, returned to barracks during personal time and retrieved these pages from their hiding place, added to them because if the ship enters combat I may not have another opportunity to record any of this. Translation occurs at 03:47 hours ship time, during what should be sleep cycle, but which I'm spending staring at the underside of the above me, counting rivets because I've counted them thousands of times before and the familiarity is comforting. The ship shudders. Not the normal vibration, but something deeper, something that feels like reality itself shifting gear. The sound of the plasma drives changes pitch, dropping from the high whine that's been constant during warp travel to a lower, steadier rumble. The temperature increases slightly, not much, maybe 2 degrees, but perceptible after months of the warp's cold. We're back. Real space, matter and energy behaving according to comprehensible physics. The alert klaxon sounds at 04:03 hours. Combat stations. All personnel to designated positions. Section 47's designated position is exactly where we already are, at our workstations, maintaining the conduits that feed the void shields, because if the shields fail the ship dies and everyone aboard dies with it. I dress. Walk the 11 minutes to Bay 12. Begin running diagnostics, because battles mean weapon discharge, means power draw, means stress on systems that are already operating at the margins of acceptable tolerances. The ship engages someone or something at 04:31 hours. I know this because the void shields activate their electromagnetic fields, creating a sensation like pressure change before a storm, like the air itself becoming dense and resistant. The shields draw power from the conduits. Draw a lot of power. The plasma flow increases, pressure spiking, temperature rising beyond normal operational parameters. Alarms begin sounding throughout Section 47, not catastrophic failure warnings, but cautionary indicators, machine spirits reporting that conditions are suboptimal, but still sustainable. Conduit 3 develops a critical fracture at 04:47 hours. I see it on the diagnostic cogitator before I hear it. Pressure dropping precipitously, containment integrity falling below acceptable thresholds. Then I hear it, a shrieking sound like metal tearing, like the ship itself screaming. I grab my tools and run. The fracture is worse than anything I've dealt with before, not a hairline crack, but a full rupture, perhaps 15 centimeters long, the edges of the metal peeled back and glowing orange from plasma exposure. Superheated matter is jetting from the opening, a stream of bright light that's cutting into the far wall, burning through steel like it's paper. The temperature in the corridor has spiked. My rad detector is clicking so fast it's producing a continuous tone. This is catastrophic. This is the kind of failure that kills everyone in the section and compromises ship integrity and gets recorded in Imperial Navy logs as an acceptable loss during combat operations. I don't think. Thinking takes time, and time is measured in seconds before the rupture widens, before the entire conduit fails, before the shields drop, and whatever we're fighting punches through the hull. I activate the emergency shutoff, rerouting plasma flow through backup channels that aren't designed for this kind of load. The jet of plasma diminishes, but doesn't stop. Can't stop completely, because the shields need power, and the shields are currently all that's preventing our immediate death. I climb the access ladder with my toolkit, get as close to the rupture as I can tolerate, begin applying sealant. The heat is beyond anything I've experienced. The body glove's thermal protection is insufficient. I feel my exposed skin blistering, smell burning hair, though I can't tell if it's mine or someone else's. The sealant goes on in thick layers because there's no time for precision, no time for proper technique. I'm pouring the compound into the rupture, watching it boil and vaporize, adding more, creating a mass of hardened material that gradually, too slowly, much too slowly, reduces the plasma flow. Something impacts the ship. The entire structure lurches, throwing me against the conduit housing, my shoulder striking metal hard enough that I feel something give way. The pain is distant, manageable, less important than the rupture that's still bleeding plasma. I keep working. Sealant. More sealant. A patch welded on with hands that are shaking from adrenaline and radiation exposure and damage I'm not stopping to assess. The weld is sloppy, inadequate, but it holds. The plasma jet stops. Pressure stabilizes. The corridor temperature begins dropping slowly, heat radiating into the rest of the ship. I climb down the ladder on autopilot, my body operating while my consciousness observes from somewhere distant. Crag is there, his face expressionless. He scans the repair with a handheld diagnostic tool, checks the readings, nods once. Acceptable, he says. Bay 19 needs assistance. Technician cell is down. I walk to Bay 19. Cell is on the deck, not moving, her body glove burned through in several places, her skin beneath charred and weeping clear fluid. Her eyes are open. She's conscious, but her breathing is shallow and rapid. I kneel beside her, don't know what to do, realize that there's nothing I can do. The medical team arrives. Different ratings than before, carrying the same stretcher, performing the same diagnostic scan. One of them looks at me and says, "You're burned. 3rd degree on your arms. Report to Medici after shift." After shift. I repeat, because the idea of leaving my station during combat operations is unthinkable. They take cell away. I return to Bay 12, to Bay 8, continue running diagnostics, while my arms send signals that my brain interprets as pain, but which feel more like information, like data points indicating that I've exceeded my body's design tolerances. The burns cover approximately 30% of my arm surface area. The skin has turned white and waxy where it hasn't charred black. I can't feel my fingers properly. This is going to reduce my work efficiency. This is going to get me flagged during the next medical evaluation. This might be what ends my service, What moves me from active duty to reassignment or reclamation? The battle continues for 7 hours and 43 minutes. I track it through power draw fluctuations, through the frequency with which the shields activate, through the impacts that periodically shake the ship hard enough to rattle equipment in their mountings. We take damage. I can tell from the sudden pressure changes that indicate hull breaches in other sections, from the way the ship's vibrations develop new harmonics that suggest structural compromise. But Section 47 remains intact. The conduits hold. The shields stay operational. We do our jobs. The alert klaxon sounds all clear at 12:14 hours. The Vox system announces victory. Enemy vessel destroyed. Casualties acceptable. The Emperor's will is done. Crew performance was adequate. Return to normal operational status. I sit at my workstation and stare at the diagnostic cogitator screen for perhaps 20 minutes, watching numbers stabilize, watching pressures and temperatures and magnetic field strengths return to parameters that I've memorized through 11 years of daily observation. Then I update my logbook with details of the conduit rupture and repair. My handwriting is nearly illegible, the pen difficult to grip with burned hands. I complete the entry anyway. The Medicare deck is located 4 levels up from engineering, accessible through a series of corridors and lift stations that I navigate in a fugue state, my consciousness distant from the body that's carrying it. The waiting area is crowded with injured crew. Burns, lacerations, broken bones, radiation exposure beyond even our normal catastrophic levels. I take a number from a servitor that doesn't acknowledge me beyond dispensing a plastic token marked 47. I sit. I wait. 3 hours later, my number is called. The Medicae is a woman perhaps 10 years older than me, her face showing the same grey cast that marks chronic radiation exposure, her hands steady as she examines my burns with practiced efficiency. She applies salves that smell like chemicals and blessed oils, wraps the burns in sterile dressings that will need to be changed daily, injects me with antibiotics and anti-radiation compounds and something else that makes the pain recede to manageable levels. 3rd-degree burns across 37% of upper extremity surface area, she says, speaking into a recording device. Thermal and radiation exposure. Treatment: topical antibiotics, systemic radiation chelators, analgesics. Prognosis: functional recovery likely with scarring. Recommendation: maintain current duty assignment with modified work restrictions. She looks at me. You'll be on light duty for 2 weeks. Limited tool use. No direct conduit access. Report daily for dressing changes. Light duty in conduit maintenance, I say, and it's not quite a question. You'll figure it out. Everyone does. She dismisses me with a gesture, calls the next number. Light duty means I spend 2 weeks at the diagnostic cogitator, monitoring data, while other ratings perform the physical repairs. Means I watch technician Vess. Newly assigned, 14 years old, eyes still showing the uncertainty of someone who hasn't yet accepted what their life has become. Climb the ladders I would normally climb. Apply the sealants I would normally apply. Conduct the repairs that are my function. He's slow, uncertain. Makes errors that I have to correct through Vox instruction, my voice steady while my hands throb beneath their dressings. But he learns. By the end of the first week, his movements have developed the efficiency that comes from repetition. By the end of the second, he no longer needs my constant guidance. He's becoming what I am, what I was, what I'll be again once the burns heal enough to restore functionality. The scars are extensive. The Medicae removes the dressings after 14 days, reveals skin that's healed but transformed, shiny and tight, discolored in mottled patterns, lacking the normal flexibility. My hands work, my fingers close and open, but they feel different now, like they belong to someone else, like I'm operating them remotely. The medica clears me for full duty. I return to Bay 12, to the conduits, to the endless cycle of diagnosis and repair. Cell doesn't return. Her bunk is stripped and reassigned within 3 days. No announcement. No memorial. She simply ceases to exist in any official sense. Her 11 years of service reduced to a notation in crew records and a gap in Bay 19's work schedule that's filled by redistributing her duties among the remaining technicians. I inherit 2 of her conduits. Vess inherits 3. The work continues because the work always continues. 11 years, 3 months, and 17 days becomes 11 years, 4 months, and 23 days becomes 11 years, 6 months, and 9 days. The calendar marks accumulate beneath my bunk, scratched into metal that's witnessed more than 4,000 days of service. I'm approaching the statistical average. 15 years, the point at which radiation damage and physical deterioration and simple cellular breakdown overwhelm the body's ability to compensate. Some technicians exceed it. Crag has. Most don't. I won't. This doesn't frighten me. Fear requires investment in future outcomes, requires believing that alternative possibilities exist. What exists is the ship, the conduits, the plasma flowing through channels maintained by people whose names no one remembers. What exists is service, function, the conversion of individual consciousness into component behavior until the component fails and is replaced. This is what life looks like aboard an Imperial warship. This is what I do. This is what I am. I write this during personal time, on scraps of paper that will probably be discarded when I'm gone, that serve no function except to document what documentation isn't meant for. The granular reality of service at the Imperium's lowest levels, where glory and honor are abstractions and survival is measured in shifts completed, repairs performed, days counted. If anyone reads this, know that we were here, know that the ship functions because people like me make it function. Know that every journey through the warp, every battle, every triumph of Imperial will is built on foundations of bodies that break slowly in the dark, performing tasks that no one witnesses and few understand. The Emperor protects, they say. What actually protects is maintenance. Sealant and welds and continuous vigilance against entropy. What protects is accepting that your infrastructure, that your life's meaning is measured in conduits that don't rupture, in shields that stay operational, in systems that continue functioning because you prevented their failure. This is enough. It has to be enough. There's nothing else. My name is Ratings, Technician 3rd Class Merivaldis. I maintain plasma conduits in Section 40, 7 of the Imperial Navy cruiser Unrelenting Doctrine. I have served for 11 years, 6 months, and 9 days. I will serve until I can't, and then someone else will take my place, will inherit Bay 12, and the diagnostic cogitator, and the calendar marks beneath the bunk, will perform the same repairs I've performed. Will count the same days I've counted, will discover eventually that this is what service means, the slow conversion of life into function, of identity into utility, of human complexity into component simplicity. This is what life really looks like inside an Imperial warship. This is the truth they don't tell you when you're recruited, when you're processed, when you're assigned. But it's the truth nonetheless, written in radiation scars and logbook entries, and the cold that never quite leaves your bones. The ship travels, the ship fights, the ship endures, and we endure with it for as long as we can, because that's all that's asked of us and all that we can give. The Emperor protects. We maintain. The conduits hold. For now, that's enough.